And hello everyone, welcome back to another nim tutorial. Before we start this tutorial, I just want to make a little disclaimer. So nim 2.0 has been released, and just to notify you, all previous tutorials are still completely valid for nim version 2. So you don't have to worry about suddenly everything breaking. And if you want to see if you have nim 2.0, you can just go nim, and in here at the top it should specify version 2.0.0 or higher. But nim version 1.6.6 should still work with most of the tutorials coming up as well, so you don't have to worry too much about your versions messing up. Great, so let's talk about the options module in nim. Now, sometimes you have a variable, but you cannot be guaranteed that that variable will contain a value once set. For example, let's say you have an asynchronous function. So this is a function that will return a value in the future, but not right now. So let's say you make a request to YouTube. It may take some time for YouTube to respond, but you don't want your program to just stop running. So in a synchronous function, you request data from YouTube, and then you wait for the data later in the program rather than now. But when you do that, your variable that you store the data in might not have any data in it. Or if YouTube responds with no data, it might not have any data afterwards. In a scenario such as that, you would want to be able to store either nothing or a specific value in a variable. And that's where the options modules come in play. So let's say import std/options. And let's start off simple. So let's go procedure, get letter position. We have a word which is of type string, and we have a letter which is of type char. And then it is option, and it returns an int. So what we are saying here is that this function will return either an integer or nothing. That is what we are saying. So if index character in word, or not if, that should be for index character in word, if character is equal to index or letter, return some index. So when we do this, we are saying we are returning an integer. In this case, we have to use some because we're using an option. But you actually can just ignore a sum out of your brain. It should still be here, but you can think of it like this. Sum is just what we need to use to make it compatible with the options module. So we need to wrap it with a sum. It basically just says, hey, we do have an integer, return that to option. And in here, let's say nothing gets returned, so then just return none, and we pass in the data type that should be returned. In this case, it will either return an integer or it will return nothing, but it will say we wanted to return an integer type. So let's say we go let a is equal to get letter pos. My name is Steve. We want to find e, single quotes, because this is a char. As you can see, char, not string. And let's echo out a. Let's see what we get. We get sum 6. So we get this value here with the index that it was returned in. If we were to ask for a letter that does not exist, we'll get none, and then the data type we wanted to get in return. Now we can easily check if something was returned in this value here by going if is sum a. So we're checking if a sum was returned, which means a value was returned. If it was, we can then echo get a. This means remove this sum here and just give us the normal value. So if we do this, we'll just get the normal 6 without this sum. So this will return us the value hidden inside of this option. Let's create another variable and call it b. And here we put an x to basically say there's nothing here. And as we know, that will give us a none of int. Then here we can say if is sum b, then echo exists get b. And what if there is nothing? We can say elif is none b. So it will check if it returned a none instead. And we can just echo nothing found. So this allows us to see if there is a value, and this allows us to see if there is no value. Of course, when we run this, we'll get nothing found. Now let's say we wanted to convert this to a string, which is pretty simple. It is echo dollar and let's say b. You could of course compare this against none int as a string, because you converted it to a string. We run this. This is actually a string now. It's no longer a none type. And here is true because this string is the same as this string. Now you might be wondering, if you have, let's say, let c is equal to sum, and let's do 6. And you echo out c, then you'll notice you do get 2 sums and then 6. Now this will happen where you have 2 options that contains 1 value. In a case such as this, you can just do flatten and then pass in c. That will remove 1 sum from this nested sum here. So if we run that, you'll notice now we only have 1 sum, and that contains our value. If you try to flatten this again, you'll actually get an error because there are only 2 sums. And because nim is typed, it will know that you cannot do this. So it will actually tell you, hey, this isn't going to work because there is no more sums to flatten. If we were to add another sum here, nim would have no problem with this because now there are 2 sums that we can remove. We cannot use flatten to get the value, but we can use flatten to reduce the amount of sums we need to do if we wanted to get something. So we don't have to go get like this, because this is too much nesting. It's very confusing. So we'd rather use flatten, so we only need to use 1 get. And that's the basics of options. The idea behind options is a variable may contain a value or may not contain a value. In a scenario where you have one of those 2 options, you can use option to say it might contain this value or not. So here is an example. Now the idea is I built a little Telegram bot just to see how you can do it in nim. Don't mind all the little squiggly bits. That is just because I don't have the Telegram module installed. But you'll notice here we also use is sum. Here we also use get. That is because message here is of type sum. Because we may receive a message or we may not. Because of that, we will need to check if it exists. So you will sometimes, even within libraries, see things like this happening, where you need to use the options module to get some values from a message or from a value that gets returned to you. So whilst this example I showed you was very, very small, it actually scales up pretty big once you get to places like this where you may or may not get values back. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next nim tutorial.